Those dulcet tones tell us it's time to get started. So I'm glad that you're here. I'm super excited to have you here as we talk about this topic, which is why you came. The single biggest place, it's the single best place to begin developing leaders in your organization. And here's what I know. I know that there are people here, as we now know, from around the world. And I also know that you're in different sorts of roles. And I don't know exactly what role all of you are in. Some of you are maybe in the line of your organization. Some may be in HR or OD or training. Some of you may be in leadership development. And you may be at any kind of level. You could be the owner of a company. You could be a VP, a director, a senior manager. You could be a team leader. You could be you could be a trainer or consultant or coach. You could be an individual leader who's here because you want to get better. And any and all of those reasons are perfectly good reasons to be here. But when I put together a webinar, I always have to think about, like, who am I talking to? So there's a lot of different kinds of folks here. Here's what I know holds you all together, binds us all together. It's this point. You're here because you care about the success and effectiveness of your organization. If you didn't, you wouldn't be here. And you believe that leaders play a part in that success. And so if we want to be more successful, we got to figure out how to make our leaders more effective. And so it's from this point that I come to you with my thoughts today. I'll try to meet the needs of all of you based on your specific roles as that shows up with your questions and comments. And so let's talk a little bit about the players today. First, that being me. And then we'll talk about you for a second. So if you don't know, my name is Kevin Eikenberry. You see that across the bottom of the screen here. I've had the good fortune to spend a lot of time thinking about leadership development, coaching leaders, consulting organizations about leadership development, written about a bunch of books about leadership and related topics, and have been thinking about this idea about how to make leadership development more effective for a very, very long time. And like most of you, I lead a team every single day. So this isn't just an abstract thing. This isn't just something that we're doing in terms of delivering services to others. This is something that I'm trying to live myself every day. So hopefully that makes this session both relevant and practical. I hope it does those things. And so I've had the good fortune of lots of people to say nice things about working with me over time. There's a few of those things here. And as you read those, let me just say that you have a role to play in this session as well. And that is largely to open up your chat and use it. I'm going to ask questions throughout. I want your input there. And here's one of the things I know. I know that there's as much learning that can happen in the chat as what I have to say, which is sometimes humbling, but it's also very true. And so I hope that you will share your questions, because if you have one, I promise you're not the only one that does. And I hope that you'll share your comments and your experiences, because they will be valuable to others. And so use the chat, follow the chat, participate in the chat as we go. I might a couple times allow you to unmute, but for the most part, we'll use the chat today. It'll be the best way for you to communicate with me. So why are we here? Well, you signed up for this because, at least in part, either because of the title or because of these bullets, which were in the copy that led before you could register. Basically, we want to help us all think about why we invest so much in leadership development. It doesn't always go so well. How can we unlock improvement in that area, both in our investment and for individual leaders? And how do we implement that key in an effective way? And help you think about how to do something with what you've just learned. So the point here isn't just, oh, that was interesting, Kevin, but what are we going to do with it as a result? So now it is time for you to share with me. I really want to know what you're thinking specifically. Like I have some guesses as to why you're here. I know what we told you this session was going to be about, but I'd love for you to use the chat. I'm going to give you a second to do this. Why specifically did you join? Is there a specific reason that you have for having joined us? And I hope that you will take a second to just share that. And Alistair, this is one of the few Zooms in your life you don't have to be on your camera. How about that? So you can just turn your camera off, and I've asked others to do the same. So in the chat, tell us why you joined us. Like, what's your destination here? What are you trying to accomplish? Taryn says to get ideas about how to make our leadership developments more impactful. Awesome. Learn how to support my leaders and help them improve. Fantastic. Elizabeth says, I'm here for myself. How do I get better for myself? I love that. Tony says to help grow our organization's team member leadership skills. Leadership isn't just a job title. I love that. Joel says, I love continual growth and development and assisting our managers become better leaders. I want to inspire others. I'm always looking to learn. I have managers that report to me. Let's see. Oh, what works and what doesn't work, someone said. Leadership is changing. How do we morph to suit what is needed? Focus on, and I think Crystal says, I have a growth mindset. Sarah says, lots of organizational change and thinking about how do we build leadership development strategies around that. Amy says, I have managers that report to me and I want to support them in becoming effective leaders. Several of you now using the difference between manager and leader. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit more. Steve Brown says this would be a good learning experience. Well, I appreciate Steve for saying that. If Randall, when you see Steve, tell him I said hello. As I'm leading, I need to know how to lead better with empathy and good and model good leadership. Alistair said, I like your content and thought this would be interesting. First time attendee. Well, welcome, Alistair. We're glad you're here. That's a good list of stuff. It's not completely out of line with what I expected, but I'm certainly glad that you all shared with me because it helps give us a context. So as I sort of surmised, some of you are here thinking organizationally, some of you are thinking personally. And I think there's going to be great benefit for you here either way. I'm going to really talk more about this from an organizational perspective. Without question, though, it applies to us individually for sure. So here's, I've been in this business for 30 years, and there's a couple of things that I need to share, sort of like pulling back the curtain, if you will, and it's some truths that aren't necessarily wonderful, as it turns out, because if we think about leadership development in the big picture, according to Harvard Business Review, about $60 billion a year is invested in developing leaders. I don't know how they come up with that number exactly, and it's an awfully big number. And it's a number we probably all can't get our arms around, but the reality is it's a big number. And lots of research says that we don't get a really great return on it. In fact, some of the estimates that I've read say that we get about 10% effectiveness from it. Now, investment made by organizations and individual leaders often pays huge dividends for an individual leader. There's no question. But in terms of it having broad impact across every leader, that's a far less likely occurrence. It does happen. It just doesn't always happen. And in fact, if we invested $60 billion this year and it was really highly effective, we might not have to invest as much the next year, right? So the point that I'm making here is that societally, we know that developing leaders is important. We're going to dive into that a little bit more in a minute. And so that's why we invest so much. And yet, if we keep doing it the way we're doing it, we're going to keep investing money and not getting the returns we'd like to get. And so while this may be true globally, it doesn't have to be true for your organization. And I'm guessing, at least in some cases, that's why you're here, hoping to say, how can we make it better for ourselves? And in fact, several of you said that in the chat. Hey, I'm here to figure out how to do this better in our organization. I want to help our leaders, my leaders, as a senior leader, be more effective. And so we're going to come back to all that. But first, we're going to take a little trip. I want you just to imagine that we're all going on a trip. You and your family, or you personally, are going on a trip. Not like, I'm not just going to take a little, be gone for a couple hours, but I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to go somewhere at some distance with some amount of time involved and invested and some amount of money invested, right? So like, I'm going to actually go on some kind of a trip, like overnight or longer. There's time involved. There's probably planning involved, and there's some of my money involved, right? So if you're going to go on a trip, when I think about it, like there's 4 things you got to have, right? Here they are. The 4 things you got to have is, number 1, you got to have a reason to go. Like, you don't have a reason to go, you're going to stay on the couch, right? You got to have a reason for going. Now, my wife and I sometimes say, well, let's just go on an adventure. And maybe the word adventure is reason enough. But for the most part, if we're going for any length of time, there's some reason we're going. We want to de-stress. We want some new experiences. We want to have some enjoyment, whatever that is. We've got some reasons for going. And then we've got to figure out or have a place to go, have a destination. Makes total sense, right? We're not, if we're going for any length of time, we're not just going to get in the car and leave and then show up wherever we show up. We probably have some destination in mind that's related to that reason for going. And we have a starting point. It's somewhat assumed in this case because it's where you are, your house or wherever, like you have a starting point. So even though it seems obvious in this case, if you don't have one, you're not going to be very successful. And then, of course, if we know where we're starting and where we're going and why we're going there, we have to have a route, right? Like this is pretty straightforward. Like if you were going to go on a trip, you got to have these 4 things. I think that's fair. So I will tell you that we can go on a trip, but if we're developing leaders, it is a trip as well. Developing leaders is a journey. It's not something that happens like this. It's not a single thing. It's a journey. And so if we're going on a journey to develop our leaders, then what do we need? Well, we need those same 4 things. We need a reason for developing them. We need a destination we're developing them toward or to. We need to know where we're starting, and we need to have a route to get there. Now, in my experience, if any one of these 4 is missing, that investment is going to be negatively impacted. And in my experience, oftentimes there is more than one of these missing in leadership development activities inside of organizations. And the reason they are suboptimal is because one or more of these very simple things are missing. Now, we could spend a long time and this entire webinar on any of them. We're only going to really talk about one of them at great. We're going to talk about all of them a little, but we're going to spend most time on one of them, which you will figure out as we go. But we need all 4. We've helped organizations think about and work on all 4. And so we're going to talk a little bit about all of them and dive into one of them a whole lot more. Okay, so first of all, why are we developing our leaders? And back to you in the chat, I want to know from your perspective, whether it's why am I developing myself or why are we developing leaders in our organizations? Like, why are we doing it? Like, why do companies invest all of this money and time to do it? Like, what's the outcome that we're after? What's the reason? I want to know. So give me your thoughts in the chat. I'll give you a second to think about that. Like in your case, why are you developing your leaders? Like, why is that important? What's your reason for doing it? Okay, so hello, Damon. So it's this positive growth and succession idea. It's productivity, alignment, which is about results, right? People are worth it, Joel says, but so it's about creating engagement. It's about a new bottom line, a better bottom line. We're trying to get people to be more effective. We want company vitality. I love that. The company needs to continue to succeed. Our leaders will help us do that. We want more productive workers who want to stay. So we could talk about reducing turnover, increasing retention, right? Like, why do people leave? They leave. Most people leave because they fire their boss, right? So we know that there's a connection between better leaders and higher retention. We want to make more positive and effective leaders to get the productivity and engagement that we're after, to improve product and service delivery. In other words, to get better results, to grow the business. Hello, Keith. To improve the relationships and results. Both are vital for success. Like, leadership's about reaching valuable outcomes, results with and through others, for sure, right? To increase engagement, to increase retention, career success. You guys are so smart. It's about being better for everyone, leaving a legacy, paving for the future, someone to take over my job, to create a better world. Alistair, I love your answer. So I didn't know what answers you would come up with, but look, when I show this, how everything that I wrote here, you all said. Like all these things, like we're trying to improve our business results. We're trying to reach goals. We're trying to help the company or organization be successful. We're trying to increase productivity. Several of you said that. We're trying to reduce turnover. Several of you said that. Trying to build culture, improve culture, engagement, all of these things. We can insert other reasons. And I just want to make an observation about all of the stuff that you all put in the chat. And some of those are sort of seem like soft and fluffy things, and yet all of them, even as like it's the right thing to do, still leads to all of these other sort of hard, measurable things. One of the mistakes that people who are in leadership development or are fans of it make, well, like, of course we should develop our leaders. Why wouldn't we? It's the right thing to do. And it is, but it is this kind of stuff that gives the true impetus to say we should make the change to develop, to spend the time and the money to develop our leaders. Just like, why would I get off the couch, right? Back to our trip. If I don't have a clear need or reason, I don't get in the car. I don't even get off the couch. And so if we don't have a clear reason as an organization to invest in the time and money and energy into our leaders, we likely won't, even if we sort of know it's a good idea. Like, we've got to have, that's got to be clear. If that's not clear, we've got a problem. And maybe in your organization, maybe not with you, you're here, but maybe in your organization, this is a potential gap. Maybe we're not investing any or very little. That would be a potential problem. But one of the reasons we're not doing it is we don't have a clear need. Another reason we might not be doing it is we've tried it in the past, it didn't go so well. In other words, we've invested and didn't get a return. So now we're not going to do it. And it's the right thing to do, or it's good for our people, while useful, may not be enough. Got to have reason. We don't have a clear need or reason, we won't get in the car. We don't have a clear need or reason, we won't start investing in our leaders in any sort of significant way, organized and specific way. So next, got to have a destination. Going on a trip, taking this leadership development journey, got to have a clear destination, a clear picture of what we want, a clear picture of what a highly successful leader in our organization would look like. What would they be doing? Do we have a clear picture of what we expect of our leaders? Do we have a clear that's clear and understandable and replicatable? Do we have clear competencies or skill sets? Many organizations have created these. Can be very, very helpful. But at a minimum, we have to have a picture of people knowing what does good leadership look like around here. And sometimes that can just simply be expectations, or it could look like competencies. But if people don't know what the destination is, how do they know when they're there? Or how do they even get motivated to take off? And of course, there needs to be purpose, right? What's the purpose? So now we're talking about not just the organizational purpose, but the personal purpose. Why would this matter to me? Why would it make a difference? Because at the end of the day, if individual leaders don't make the decision to say, this is important to me, then they're not likely going to put in the work, even if we give them all kinds of great tools, techniques, processes, programs, etc. Like, there's still this personal piece that has to be determined. So the question would be, for you individually, or for your leaders organizationally, is our leadership destination clear? So if you're here for yourself, one of the things to be thinking about here is, where am I trying to get to? Like, I would argue that, yes, leadership development is a journey, and maybe we can always get better, but we ought to be having some guideposts along our development. If we don't have any guideposts, how do we even know we're making progress? So, like, is our destination, or are there signposts or benchmarks or nightly stops along the way that can move us in that direction to stay with our journey metaphor, right? Is the destination clear? If it's not, could have a problem. Now, to our model here that we're talking about the metaphor of a trip and a leadership development journey, that leads us to the next thing. We've got to have a route. How are you going to get there? Right? And if you're going on a trip, you're going to use an atlas, which I still love. Google Maps is fine, but seeing that bigger picture that a map provides rather than just what do I do next is very valuable. So what's our route going to look like? What are our route options? Like if you're going on a trip, you've got multiple ways you could get there, and spending some time thinking about what's our route matters a lot. So in leadership development, we think about things like, well, we're going to have some training programs, we're going to have some processes, maybe we have some e-learning, we got an LMS, we send people to some stuff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is all of the activities that you're used to thinking about. Perhaps it's some of the stuff that you expected we would talk about today. And so you can make this list, right, of activities. I would say that if we want to think about a roadmap, we really ought to think a little deeper than that. We ought to think about what are the mindsets that we want our leaders to have? What are the skills we need them to have? What habits do we want them to have? What are the underlying principles or competencies, perhaps, that we want to be developing towards? Are we creating real learning where people are having the chance to try stuff and take action and not just have it be head knowledge, that we're closing the knowing and doing gap, that we have coaching and mentoring because we know that coaching is a very effective way to change behavior. We are thinking about it in the long term. It's integrated into the work. Some of this thinking about learning about being more than just delivering people something is sometimes used, this idea of 70-20-10, that 70% of what we learn is learned on the job. And so are we thinking about the roadmap in this broader sense? And so, yeah, we can have this stuff. We probably have some of this stuff. We create and deliver some of this stuff. Got to have it. Better if we can think about it in the context of this, right? So now we've got a reason to get in the car. We've got a place on the map we're heading toward, and we've got a route, but we're missing something here. Like, what's missing? Well, what's missing is the starting point, right? The starting point. Now, this particular picture is close to where I once lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. But here's the thing. All of the people that when I lived there, if I was going to go on a trip with several other people, we don't all live in the same place. We have different starting points. So my question to you, going back to leadership development, is this: are all of your leaders starting from the same place? And I know the answer. They're not. And yet, for the most part, we create routes. Hopefully we have reason. Hopefully we have destination, although those are sometimes missing. We probably have routes. That's the one thing that we've spent time doing. We could probably get better at the route, but how can we even build the route if we don't know where we're starting? And so are all of your leaders starting from the same place? I can unequivocally tell you they're not. And so how can we build the journey if we don't know the starting point? Because if the starting points are different, doesn't the route have to change? Doesn't that make sense? Now, to my example, if everyone lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's not that much different. But the starting points for your leaders are much likely far more divergent than that. Not all of your leaders are in the same zip code. You've got leaders who are far more experienced and developed. You got leaders who are far newer. You've got leaders that don't have great previous role models. You got all sorts of starting points. And so if you follow my metaphor, we have to figure out the starting point. So before I go any further, and Keith, I see your comment there that you put in the chat a little bit ago. I didn't mention it, but I did see it. So before I go any further, any comments, any questions, anything so far that you want to ask about, that you want to comment on, that you want to, anything at all so far before we continue? Anybody? If you don't have anything, just tell me I'm good or something in the chat. So I got some kind of feedback. When you got as many people here as I have, it's nice to have some clue where we're at. Questions, comments. All right. Hello, Valerie King. And cool. All right. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. So if we're not all in the same place, yeah. So Damon says this is so true, especially with large organizations. I would say the larger, the more likely, but I've certainly seen it in smaller organizations too, for sure. Right. And so we use phrases like cookie cutter leadership development. And again, I'm not casting dispersions on anyone. Like, we can understand why it happens. And you know what? All of the stuff inside the cookie cutter, like I happen to like a good sugar cookie used with a cookie cutter. Like, there's not like there's necessarily anything bad with it. It's just not complete unless we think about all of the pieces. So let's talk about, leaving our metaphor for a second, and say, like, how do we determine everyone's individual starting point as a leader? Well, I think there's some things that we ought to think about, right? Like, what is a leader's individual performance? Where are they at now? What are their behaviors? Positive and less so. What is their current skill level? Do they have a toolkit? Right? Do they use the toolkit? Do they have a clear picture of what leadership should look like in this organization? What is their impact currently? Do they have a retention problem on their team? Right? How collaborative is their team? What's the culture on their team? Right? And then the last one on this list, I think, might be the most important of all. Like, where's people's current level of self-awareness? And here's what I can tell you about people's self-awareness. That there's lots of research that backs this up, and they basically research says the same thing, that ask people how self-aware they are. Like 70, 80, 90% of people will say that they are above average in their self-awareness. But when researchers look at the reality, it's more like 5, 6, 7, 8% of people who are really, truly, highly self-aware. So we're walking around with blinders on, and we can only operate based on what we see. And if what we see is not the whole picture, then we've got a problem, right? So we've got a problem, right? So the question then is, how do we do this? Right? Keith says you have to know yourself to effectively lead yourself. And then you can effectively lead others. And that, yes, and there's still all of this other stuff. Like, I don't know how to, like, once I'm aware of deficiencies or strengths, then I can work from there. There's still more that I need. But if I don't have that, I don't have any reason to move, right? I'm perfectly happy, right? So in my blissful ignorance, right? And so how do you get here? Well, there's a lot of things that you could do to get here, to get parts of this. Like, if you have a coach, that could help with self-awareness, right? You have some measurements that might help with some of these things, like performance or impact, some of these things. But if you really want to get a good handle on all of them, to find the starting point, you need to do 360 assessments. Now, some of you were probably already ahead of me figuring that out. So, Tom mentioned assessments there. Well, thank you, Keith. That's a highly accurate statement there, Keith. But the point is that a 360 assessment is an extraordinarily powerful way to set the starting point. And so if we don't have, we've already, I think, made it relatively clear, if we don't have a clear starting point, we're going to have a hard time getting to the destination that we want to get to. Now, for some people in your organization, back to Damon's point about a larger organization, if we've got a cookie cutter route or set of tools, some people are going to thrive with those because that route works pretty good for their starting point. But it doesn't necessarily work for everybody's starting point and everyone's style and a whole lot more. So let's talk about 360s a little bit more, because some of you are sitting there saying, well, I don't know, Kevin, about all that. So let's talk about that a little bit more, right? So let's talk about what they are first. And even if you already know this, just hang with me for a second. So a 360 assessment is a complete view of a leader's starting point. It gives you the chance to get perspectives all the way around, 360-degree perspective, right? So it's our view of ourselves, it's our boss's view of us, it's our peers' view of us, it's our team's view of us. There's your 360, but it's also three-dimensional. So it's also others that see you, observe you in your leadership role, with seeing your behaviors. So it's three-dimensionally 360 degrees. It's how we see ourselves matched against how everyone else sees us across these kinds of things we've been talking about: skills, behaviors, habits, etc. Right? And most often, and I would say most effectively done, anonymously. Okay. So at some level, that's 360s. There are lots of them. There are lots of details that we'll still get to, but that's the starting point. But what I really want to know now is, I know that at this point that there are people that have different kinds of experiences with this. So I'm going to put a poll up here. Yeah, someone has to want to change it. So as Tom, as I mentioned that earlier, looking at you at your point in the chat, that point earlier, like a leader has to have that reason for themselves. Like I have to say, I see why this matters to me without question, right? Without question. When we were talking earlier about the route includes the mindset, there's no doubt that that's part of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this poll up, and I'm going to give you some choices, and you can use more than one answer here as well. So let me get the poll up here, and it's multiple choice, so you can give more than one answer. Here they are. My experience with 360s is that I have personal or organizational experience that's positive. I have personal or organizational experience that is neutral or that's negative. I don't have any experience, but I've heard positive stuff. I don't have any experiences, but I've heard horrors. Oh, the second, one of those is wrong. That should say, the second one from the bottom should say, I've heard horror stories. No experience, but I've heard horror stories. And the last one is, the next one is I'm open, but I'm curious. And the last one is, this is the first time I've ever heard of this. So yes, so the one that says heard good things, no experience, call that horror stories. That's Kevin not double checking his poll is all that is. All right, so we'll let this close here in just a second. It's like most of you have participated. I'll give you another second to do this. And I'm going to go ahead and close it now. And so I'll share the results with you so you can see the results. So 43% of us have some experience with it, either for ourselves or in our organizations that's positive. 22% say, yeah, okay, whatever. Maybe it's a good idea, Kevin, but I don't have real strong feelings one way or the other. 14% of us, five people are saying, I got bad experience with this. And I've got 22 people that percent of people have no experience, but have heard positive. So about 2/3 of us either have firsthand experience or have heard positive things. And that's awesome. Some of us are curious. Some of us have, this is the first we've heard of it. So wherever you are is perfectly fine. And what I want to do is tell you that I want to talk right now to the people who are neutral or negative or have heard anything negative about it. If we can do that right now, let's talk about how people misuse these tools. And it's in the misuse that the negative experiences come. So let's talk about how people sort of mess this up, right? So let's talk about how people mess this up. If I can get the slides to move. There we go. How do people misuse 360s, both individuals and organizationally? First, number one, the purpose is wrong or misunderstood. Like, people misunderstand why we're doing this. Like, we're checking up on people. The purpose is wrong because this is just another program. This is just something we're going to try. Like, if the reason for doing them across the organization, and not just for the leaders, but for the raters, isn't clear, right? For example, if the raters don't believe it will be anonymous, then they may not share the whole truth, as one example. If people think this is being used as a way to call the leadership herd a little bit, then that might dictate how people use it, how open they are to using the results, and on, right? So it's the purpose is wrong or misunderstood before it happens, while the rating is happening, or after, any or all of those things, right? And I have seen all of those things go wrong, or I've been in working with organizations where they went wrong before we arrived. Sometimes the issue is that leaders get this feedback and then they go try to figure out who said the negative stuff, and they seek retribution in a overt or covert way, which further reduces trust, and also doesn't lead to those leaders learning anything anyway. And I've seen this become toxic in an organization. So the next is what I call rater fatigue. We think this is a great idea. We're gonna have a bunch of people do 360s all at once, and what ends up happening is a whole bunch of people have to do a whole lot of assessing of a whole lot of other people, and there's rater fatigue. Rolling this out too quickly or without thinking it through in an organization can cause unintended negative consequences. Now, this one isn't as bad potentially as some of the others, but it's really a real point, right? Tom says there needs to be some knowledge of the biases built in during the debrief, which implies that there ought to be a debrief, because sometimes there is no coaching, or there is very poor or ineffective coaching included. In other words, when I described you what a 360 is, it just said, we're going to anonymously collect all this feedback, and then there's a report, right? But it gets misused if there's no coaching, there's no understanding and analysis of the results, if there's no chance to really understand the results, and if there's no way to think about what the action plan is, and so there's no follow-up expected. It's just one more thing we did. Yep, did our 360, knock it off the list, but there's no like, here's what I need to do now as a result of what I've learned. Not only maybe what I learned that I need to correct or improve, but what do I now know that people think I'm really good at? In fact, one of the things that I think most often happens, is that a leader will realize that there's something that they think they're really poor at, the rest of the organization thinks they're pretty good at. Now, that doesn't mean they should stop. It just means they have a higher bar of expectations for themselves, which is awesome, as long as they also understand that it's not as bad as they think. Sometimes that's one of the biggest insights that can come from this process. However, if there's no coaching, if there's no analysis, if there's no chance to think about it, right? And Tom says multi-rater, of course, we're certainly describing this as it's multi-rater. It's not just one other person. That by definition, it doesn't meet our definition of what 360 degrees means. So there's no doubt. Individually, Melinda says, we can't take the feedback personally, have to use it to better ourselves. That's why, Melinda, the coaching is so important. Because if the coaching is done effectively, and if the purpose up at the top here is set up effectively, then it's known that this is a starting point that becomes a part of our development, which means we also need to have a route, right? And Damon says, that's what we experienced. No follow-up, coaching after less than stellar assessment. Like, I think it's less about the assessment than it's about the rest of this stuff, right? Like, none of this stuff here is the fault of the tool. Like, it's not the tool's fault. Like, there are all sorts of different 360 assessments, right? And there's no doubt that I think some of them are more effective perhaps than others. Some of them are a better fit for a certain organization than others, without question. But ultimately, most of the negative stuff that comes out of them isn't about the assessment itself. It's about the rest of the stuff. So, like, how do we do it better, right? How do we do it better? Well, we do it better by making it a process, by helping people see that this is a part of something bigger. It's not just a thing we're doing. And we need to make sure, that we make the purpose clear and transparent. Doing it well means that we're using 360 assessments to help leaders develop. We're not using it for, well, this is your last chance. And we're not using this to fix people. And obviously all of us can improve, right? Melinda said it, we all have room for improvement, 100%, but that's different than fixing. You know what I mean when I say, well, we're going to fix this person. This is their last chance. If we're using this only in that sort of way, then it's not possible it can be as effective organizationally as it could otherwise. Or thinking about this organizationally, we need to think about using it broadly, right? Too often it's used just to fix this person, just maybe for high potential, quote unquote, high potential people. I think in its best use, it is used more broadly, intelligently, over time, in a process, used more broadly, and it absolutely has to be tied to next steps and expectations. And it's the starting point for the roadmap or the route, right? If we know that this is the destination we're headed toward, and now we know our starting point, now we can start to say, what do we need to do? Where do I need to focus? What are the things I need to do first on my path? And so that's absolutely where we need to think about. So now I'm going to take you back to where we started. Say that the journey to developing our leaders is to have a reason for going, to have a destination, to have a starting point, and to have a route to get there. And we've talked a little bit about all those. And of course, I've started to home in on the starting point. So before we start to put a bow on this whole thing, questions, comments, observations. I love the things you've been saying in the chat. I've tried to acknowledge them as we went and tie them in. Anything else or any other specific questions that you have at this point before we continue? Anybody? Anything at all? Give you a second. And so Tom says, if we're going to involve the leader's leader, right, then there's variables around how that manager or that leader does, right? There's no doubt about that. And that's why the overall purpose, yes, I can put that last slide up one more time, Kathy. I'm not sure which one you mean by last. I'm guessing you mean that one. So I'm going to put that up for a second. But Tom's point is true. Like, there's no doubt. There's no doubt about that, right? So Joel says, other than a 360, what other ways can we help people to identify their starting point? Well, certainly we can help people. We can, if we're coaching them, or if we're the leader of them, and therefore are their coach. Oh, sure. You betcha, Kathy. Go into there in just a sec. Right? So the reality is that we, as their coach, can provide them a perspective, right? And we can help them open that self-assessment a little bit more. Some of the things that, like we can help people see, we can have measurements around certain areas of their performance. Like if they know that they're short or have shortcomings in this particular area of their results, then those things can be determined in ways other than a 360, right? Like if you have You do an employee engagement study, and you may not be able, depending on the size of the organization, you may not be able to drill down to an individual leader, but you might be able to get to groups, and that might help. So there's lots of things that you can do that might help, right? And Valerie says a leader needs to go into 360 in a positive way, that you want your staff to grow. There's got to be a clear purpose. It's got to be transparent. It's got to be valuable. Like we're coming into this with that starting point, and yet it absolutely needs to be stated again. And so I'm glad you did that, Valerie, for sure. Right, for sure. And back one more time to Tom's comment about that leader's leader and how they help create that accountability for the action steps. 100%. 100% true. But here's the thing. We can also, as a part of this process, make sure that those leaders have a clear understanding about what their role in this is. Does that guarantee it will go perfectly? No, but does it improve the chances it will go better? For sure. So when we think about this, not as a thing, but as a process, part of that process is helping everyone know what their role in it is. That includes letting individuals know that it truly is anonymous. That includes letting leaders of leaders know that they have a role to play in it. That includes a whole bunch of these kinds of ideas, right? Eric's point is they can create a more trusting relationship between the leader and their own leader. It doesn't always, it won't automatically be the case, but it certainly can be the case. And I've certainly seen that play out for sure. Okay. Any other comments before or questions before we continue? All right. So the question then is, because we've been involved in doing this, like I said, for 30 years, like, how can we help? You might be wondering, like, okay, well, now what do we do? So I think we can help with any of these four things. Like from a consultative perspective, we've helped organizations think about the reasons. We've helped senior leaders think about the reasons. We've certainly helped organizations with the destination by helping them create their competency models or setting clearer expectations or a picture. We've done that. Certainly, there's lots of things that we deliver on a regular basis that's part of that roadmap or that route. But as I said, we're talking today mostly about the starting point. So I want to tell you a little bit about our 360 process and how it might be helpful in your organization. So before I go any further, let me just say this. If you're already using 360s in your organization, hopefully you've already gotten some really valuable stuff to how to make sure we can make them even more effective. But if you've had bad experiences and you're looking for something else, or if you're looking for a way to insert this into what you're doing or to be the starting point for what you might want to do, let me tell you a little bit about our specific process. So our process is that we come to you and have a consultation with you so we understand the context at which you're operating, what you're trying to do. Valerie, I'll get to your question in a second. So we will consult with you to make sure that we've got context, that we understand what you're trying to do, to see if in fact what we can offer will help, and to make sure that what we're going to offer and the way we're going to help you will be most effective. We will partner with you and your leaders to help create that context, to try to help solve some of those early concerning pinch points in the process. You pretty much hand it off to us. So all the communication tools, we might ask you to send emails, for example, to raters or whatever, but we'll give you all of that content and how to do it and the context in which to use that. But the tool, the anonymity of the tool, all that stuff is all handled by us. We give the process to those leaders being rated, about how to pick their people and all of those other pieces so that all of that works and is clean. And then, of course, we provide the instrument itself, the process itself, the report itself. Right. So now let's talk about that assessment itself, because there are lots of these assessments, as I've already said. Let me tell you a little bit about ours. So Valerie says, do a 360 have to have a rating system? A rating system in terms of a final score, I don't think they do at all. Obviously, people have to have some way to give feedback. And like in ours and in many of them, it says, like, for this particular behavior, how often do you see people exhibiting this? But no number is attached to it. At the end of the day, there's no sort of rating like we often see in a performance review attached to ours, and really to many, it is not. Ours has a proven history. Ours is not designed to say, okay, here's your style, but rather say, here's how you're doing against these behaviors. Here's how other people are seeing you do against these behaviors. And it's based on our 13 competencies and our competency model that we've been using since before I wrote the book, Remarkable Leadership. So that's the framework for our particular assessment. We are in the process right now of creating an option to include long distance components. So obviously, people are now working in many cases in hybrid teams, in virtual teams, and remote teams, whatever words you want to use. And so very soon, by the end of the year, we will have a new version of the assessment with questions specifically available for that piece if needed. And if you got some leaders in your organization that have that component, that would be available. If you have some that don't, it wouldn't need to be used for them. So that's what's new in ours. And if your organization is large enough and you really want us to customize it, to use what we know about doing these and create a tweaked assessment based on your situation, we can do that. You can see that there's an asterisk there because we're not going to do that if you got 3 people, but there is that possibility, and we can have that conversation with you for sure if that's something that would be of use to you and your organization. So that's our assessment. It's based on our competency model. We've been using it for a long time. We've used it with lots of leaders, right? So back to our process. So we're going to consult with you, partner with you, and all those things. And then, as we've said several times now, probably won't surprise you, our process includes coaching. Now, that coaching can be someone on our team or someone that I have trained and certified to be your coach, or it could be us certifying coaches inside or preparing coaches inside of your organization to do that internally. All of that could be determined based on the size of your need, the length of your need, et cetera, right? So, and then of course, we can help with the roadmap or the route that follows all of that. Some of your organizations are already using some of our tools, and so we can help hook those things together, or we can help you map what you're already doing and help individual leaders map what you already have available to them in terms of resources and that roadmap from those things that come out of their coaching. Coaching with us starts with understanding what the assessment says and what it doesn't say, so that people aren't misinterpreting it. It helps them recognize their strengths as well as their weaknesses. It doesn't simply say, here's what you got to get better at here, and here. And it leads to an action plan to say, what do I need to do now? And who do I need to communicate what to now as a result of my new insights based on the results of the assessment? So that's our process, right? So if you wanted to get started with us, it's very simple. The first thing you can do is reach out. So let me answer Tom's questions first. Does your experience show that key indicator of success is based on expectation of top management? Yeah, so I'm reading through your question, Tom, and the reality is that some of what you're saying is that's the destination. Like, make sure that we know what we really want good leadership to look like in our organization, right? And if we don't have that, even if we have the starting point, we have a disconnect. So like that, I think what you're saying, if I'm reading that quickly, is that that's got to be there to make this ultimately work. Now, you can have a highly effective 360 process to give people a clear starting point where leaders, especially those who are have a strong desire to improve, can use that without the rest of those things and get great and have success. But ultimately, to make it work, you've got to have all 4 of the pieces that we've been talking about today. And of course, that destination is part of it, right? So you can get started with us by reaching out to your contact on our team and schedule a pre-consult. And here's what I mean by a pre-consult. There's 0 risk. Isn't going to cost you anything. There's 0 risk. And I would encourage you to bring others with you. Like if you're a part of the L&D team in your organization, or if you're a line, you might want to bring others along. If you're in line management and you want to bring someone from HR or L&D with you, awesome. Like, bring whoever to this pre-consult that you want, right? And here's the process that we're going to follow with you. This isn't going to cost you anything except your time. And there's no expectation of it as an outcome, but to help you see how this might fit into your process, right? So we're going to answer the questions you have, find out where you are in your leadership development journey for your leaders, figure out what your needs and concerns are. What's your past history with 360s, for example? Like, we've had them, it didn't go so well, and those sorts of things. We're going to help you think about where you might be able to put 360s into your existing plans, or how you could use them as a starting point in your plans. We can help you think about how to pilot it if you want. And listen, all of that stuff would work for you even if you didn't pick our assessment. Like, all of those things we're still not even talking about our assessment necessarily. Like, obviously we'd love to work with you with our assessment, right? But what we really want is to help create more effective leaders in the world. And we can help you with this, even if you don't buy assessments from us or buy an assessment process from us, right? And then, of course, with the rest of the other pieces of the journey, we can help you with all those things as well, the other 3 parts of the overall process. So you can reach out if you know who your contact is on our team. You can reach out to them and schedule that at your earliest convenience. If you don't know who that person is, you can put your email in a chat to me. Like, go into the direct messages and send me your email, and I'll make sure someone reaches out to you. Or you can send an email to info@kevineikenberry.com. That should say info@kevineikenberry.com. Clearly, is what it should say. So feel free to do that if you want, or you can wait, because you registered, you're going to get an email from us, and it's going to give you a link to someone on our team that you could get on their calendar and talk with them. And that's what I hope that you do. Okay. That's what I hope that you do. So here's the way I think about this. Like, now is the time to do this. Maybe now is the time because you were here and something led you to be on this call. Maybe now is the time because it's nearing the end of the year and we're starting to think about plans for next year. Maybe now is the time because now is the time you're doing your budget planning for what you're going to do around leadership development next year. I don't know which part of now it is, but I know that now is the time, because all of us want these things. All of our organizations want these things, which we said and you said, right? That we need, that we get when we get more effective leaders, right? And so the way to get started, to get that pre-consult, is to put your email in the chat directly to me, which someone has already done. Reach out to the person on our team that you're already connected with, that you know will be the person you're going to talk to, and reach out to them. Send us an email to info@kevineikenberry.com right now. Or you can wait. You get an email from us the next few days, which will tell you who the person is on our team that you can reach out to. Now is the time. And the other thing that I know is that success favors action. I hope that you take action on this, on the ideas that you heard today. And I hope that you take action on this no-risk pre-consult that we're offering you. Hope that you'll do that. And but most of all, I hope that you will continue to be serious about your own development as a leader, and that you will be taking action to help the leaders in your organization be more effective. And with that, I thank you all for being here. I wish you the very best. I look forward to being connected to all of you when you make those pre-consultation calls, and hearing about how successful they've been. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.